Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, I'm Tom Dillon, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Helen Leathers. Good morning, Helen. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good. I'm wonderfully well, thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm full of beans. I've joined a gym.
Okay. Tell me about that.
I just fed up of not being able to get out and run or play tennis in this inclement weather we've been having. So I've joined a gym. It's going well.
Good. I'm going to the gym after this.
Oh, because you belonged to a gym for a long time. It's been 16 years since I belonged to a gym.
And what's changed?
The weather.
I meant at the gym.
Oh, at a gym, nothing. Actually, nothing.
They've still got the same equipment and everything.
Still got the same paint on the walls. The guy showing me around said, just to let you know, we are going to spend some money this year. I said, okay, well, I'm just going to get on the treadmill, run 3 miles and get off again. So I'm not going to worry too much. Yeah.
But good that you can exercise when the weather's not great.
I'm feeling very fit.
Good. Fabulous.
What are we talking about today, Helen?
Well, we're looking at a coaching tool today. I don't know if you remember this, but way back in July of 2023, in episode 14, we explored the cognitive behavioural approach to coaching.
We did, yeah.
It's a long time
That's
ago.
nearly 18 months. Well, it is 18 months ago, isn't it? Yeah. We've been doing it that long.
Yeah. Well, the 100th episode's coming up.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So we introduced cognitive behavioural coaching to our listeners, and we touched really briefly on 2 useful models within that approach. But I had to listen back, and we spent less than 5 minutes exploring what I think is a really useful model. Okay. So I thought we could make a return visit to the space model.
So you mentioned 2 models.
Yes. So there's the space model, which is often referred to as the hot cross bun model. Mm-hmm. That's what I want to talk about today. And there's also the ABCDE model, which we can do another time. We're not going to talk about today. No. Yeah. So I think it deserves a bit more than 5 minutes.
Good.
So we're going to give it about 15. So it is very much an overview, but I think it's good to revisit.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to give it all away.
No, it is something that we cover on the course, isn't it? On the Transformational Coaching Diploma.
If you want to know more about it, come and do our course.
Yeah, absolutely.
We go into it for at least half an hour. Okay, so episode 14 is an overview.
Yes.
But today we're going to focus on the space model, or
the hot cross bun model.
I don't know which I prefer, actually.
I prefer the space model.
Yeah, it's more descriptive, isn't it? And it reminds you of what the elements of it are.
Yeah. And I also think that if you were using it, for example, we've got some lifestyle medicine doctors who are going through our program, and I think if you're using it to discuss healthy lifestyle habits around eating, I think the hot cross bun model probably isn't the best thing to read.
I can taste the cinnamon as we're talking. It just does lend itself to you feeling hungry. Good. Let's stick with the space model then.
Yeah, because it's a really good visual representation, I think. And we'll put it in the show notes so that people can see.
Okay. So let's talk through the space model.
Yeah, so if you can imagine that it's a circle with crossed arrows on top, just like a hot cross bun, the model illustrates the interconnected areas of our actions, our mind or thinking, our mood, and our body, which can all be influenced by the situation that we find ourselves in.
And in turn, they can influence the situation.
Yes, and they influence each other, they're influenced by, and it's all interrelated and interconnected. So those arrows illustrate that. And we'll come to that shortly. So it's basically a circle. The circle represents the situation or the social context that you find yourself in. And on top of that circle, there are the 4 elements. And if we think of them as positioned as north, east, south, and west, they are the physiology. So what's going on in your body? What do you notice about your body? How does it feel?
Okay, so just for clarification, the S is the S of space. P is, we are going in order.
Yes, physiology so the S is the situation. The P is the physiology. The actions are what you do and how you behave in that situation. The C is cognition. So that's what you're thinking. And then the E are the emotions that are coming up for you, how it's feeling emotionally. And as I say, each element has arrows pointing to the next and across the middle, indicating that they're all influenced by each other and influence each other. So by exploring the situation through this model, we would think about each of those domains and what we notice about them, what we notice first, what our actions are as a result of all of this. And it can help us to understand ourselves better. It can help us to start to think about the reactions that we have in certain situations, perhaps to certain people, what feelings, what thoughts are coming up, and how true they are.
Okay, so really useful when we're thinking about unhelpful thinking.
Yeah, and the stories that we tell ourselves. Because it's not as simple as, here's the situation and here's how I react, feel and think about it. I'd like to take this model and just bring it to life a little bit more to help us to understand ourselves better. So in the show notes, I've added another image of this model with a sort of second diagram to help illustrate what I'm about to talk about.
Okay.
You're looking confused.
I am confused now. So you're going to bring it to life.
Yes. So you've got this model and it would be simple to look at and say, there's a situation and this is how I react, this is how I think and so on.
So the space model?
Yes.
Yes.
But life's not like that. So everything that we experience is seen through various lenses. And I want to explore that a little bit. Because as humans, we know...
Sounds like you've created a new model.
Well, not really. It's a way of looking at this model, I think, which hopefully will
a new lens.
Explain it. A new lens, yes. So obviously, we know that we try to make meaning out of situations, don't we? We go into a situation...
Storytelling.
We tell a story. We notice what we notice. We feel how we react. We think our thoughts. We feel our emotions and we behave in a particular way. And often, and I've been guilty of this in the past, we think we have no choice about any of that. We think that that's how I react, that's how I feel in those situations. You know, that's how I behave when this happens. But cognitive behavioural coaching is about thinking about our thinking, isn't it? There's a word for that, isn't it? What's that word? Thinking about our thinking.
Metacognition.
Metacognition, yes. And I think it's a lot about extending that gap between the moment when we encounter something and then the moment when we react to it.
Viktor Frankl comes to mind.
Viktor Frankl.
Very topical, seeing as it's the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. So he was a Swiss psychologist that was in Auschwitz for some time and found meaning. He wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, as a result of his experiences. And within that, he has the quote of, between the stimulus and response, there is a gap. And what we choose to do in that gap gives us our freedom.
A very powerful quote.
Yeah, very well, that's why I've learnt it.
And like I said, I think we often think that we don't have that gap. There isn't that gap. We don't have a choice.
No, I responded that. I reacted rather than responded, like that in the dentist the other week. I was having a crown fitted, but I arrived and sat there waiting for a quarter of an hour. And then after a quarter of an hour, they said, oh, sorry, the crown isn't here.
Ugh.
This was like a month after it'd been ordered. So, great. Okay. I wasn't happy. And actually, in that moment, I just chose not to be happy about it. But, yeah. On reflection, I could have been more. No, it was fine. I wasn't rude, but I just was grumpy about it. I'm quite happy with my grumpiness in that moment. But, yeah. But other situations where you care about stuff, it would be useful to be able to have a gap, to do some thinking.
Absolutely. So if we imagine that situation, any situation that we go into, we look at it, we try to interpret what's going on, what it means for us. But, and here's where I've done a little diagram to help illustrate this, it's not always a clear view because we're looking at that situation through a number of lenses or layers. And they include our beliefs, our values, and our past experiences. And they all inform, and they kind of muddy the waters a bit.
Yeah.
Because that situation might remind us of a past situation. Or a person might remind us of a person we once knew and how they were with us, and that skews or colours the meaning we make out of the situation. And then that impacts how we respond, how we start to think, how we feel emotionally, and ultimately how we behave. So, shall I give you an example?
Just give me an example. Is it different to my dentist example?
Yes, it is.
Actually, unconscious bias comes into it as well, doesn't it?
Yes. So there's another layer that we have to look through.
Go on, give me your example.
So I think the example that I like to use it's a simple one. Imagine walking into the front room and your friend or your partner who's on the phone call suddenly cancels the call. I used to say puts the phone down, but we don't do that anymore, do we? Cancels the call and turns around and starts chatting away to you. Now, some people will walk into that room and think nothing of it. Some people will walk into that room and maybe, given past experiences or beliefs, they will react in different ways. So let's say your birthday's coming up and you walked in and I quickly cancelled a phone call and sort of just tried to behave normally. You might think, she's up to something. Like maybe she's arranging a surprise for my birthday. Other people might think, who's she talking to? And become suspicious.
Oh, okay.
I'm glad that you have that surprise reaction that you wouldn't automatically think suspicious, but some people might, depending on past experiences or beliefs, concerns, biases, worries. So some people will be excited at the thought that maybe something interesting's happening. Other people, like probably I'd walk in on you and go, oh, who are you talking to? I'd just be nosy. So one situation...
Just for record, I don't do this. I don't hang up when Helen walks in the room.
It's just an example. It's just a made-up story. But to illustrate how different people might respond to that situation in different ways, depending on their past experiences, their values, their beliefs, and what's going on for them in that moment, if it's about to be their birthday, as an example. Yeah. So it's never as straightforward as, here's the situation and here's the reaction. Because then if we start, let's say someone was suspicious, they might change their body language, they might fold their arms, they might become a bit short with that person, they might be a bit, they might even start to ask questions and be inquisitorial. So that then changes the whole dynamic. And it could be that they were arranging a surprise birthday party, so there's this interplay between what's going on in our head, how we react, how that person responds, how we react to that response, and it can become a bit of a vicious cycle almost, that a relatively calm, normal situation can become something that maybe causes an argument or something like that.
Okay, good.
So I think we can understand that how we tell that story and how others respond to it can be different in different scenarios, different on different days. And using this model, we can start to think about what actually happened and where it might have gone a bit wrong, why we might have made some assumptions, or that even just that we might have made some assumptions that there might be another version of this story. And I think once we start to explore, and it's the same with all coaching, isn't it? We can start to understand that we're not a slave to our emotions or a slave to our thinking or our instant responses, and we can have that gap. We can have a more measured approach. We can be more curious, and we can perhaps handle situations in a more well-rounded way, in an emotionally mature way. And I know, as I say, years ago, I thought there wasn't a gap. I thought my response was my response, and that was that. And I couldn't help how I felt about things. But actually, with the work I've done on myself over the years, I know that's not true. And we have that time to think about what's going on. So that's a little bit of an introduction. I have a question for you.
Okay.
Because I know we both use the space model. When might you use the space model in the coaching room?
Okay, so obviously if someone's in what they think is a stressful situation. So there might be some unhelpful thinking going on. They might be becoming quite emotional about the situation. So that reacting to it rather than responding to it, and having reacted to it, that confirmation belief comes in and they go, well, I'm right. We don't like to be wrong. So however we've reacted, we tend to back up our own behaviors and say, well, no, I was right to react in that way. So I think that's a good time to actually explore what went on and how someone was thinking. So actually bringing that situation back up again and go, okay, what thoughts were going through your head? What was the emotion for you? Where did you feel that in your body? How did you behave towards the other person? So so that's probably the most helpful place to bring it up.
Yeah. And unhelpful habits and behaviours, I think, is another area.
Definitely. Yeah, just recognising what someone's thinking is as they're reaching for a biscuit that they didn't actually want to eat.
Yeah. Excellent. So here's a question I know will come up because it comes up in our workshops. How do we introduce the space model in a non-directive way? What are your thoughts on this?
You can't introduce it in a non-directive way. I quite often say about this sort of introducing of models, we are directive about the process, not about the content. So I'm not going to tell people how they should be thinking, behaving, what emotions they should be feeling, but we are managing the conversation and directing the process. So if we have a model that we think is going to be helpful as a lens, a new way of looking at adding a new perspective to the situation, then I think we're not going to do that in a non-directive way. So if we're sitting having a very person-centered coaching conversation where we're just listening to their story and we're giving them some space, ironically, giving space, then at some point, having listened to their story, we might want to challenge some of their unhelpful thinking, ask someone to reflect on the emotions they're feeling, what actions they've taken. And this is a great tool to use, I think, to look at a situation through a different lens. So I don't have any qualms about, okay, let's pause. Here's a model that I think might be helpful to look at this situation through.
And I think you mentioned there about being person-centered and asking those questions. We could use this model to inform our questions without saying, here's a model.
Yeah. But you asked how I might introduce the model. So this is how I might introduce the model. And I wouldn't worry about it being non-directive. I would just be, I have a model. I think it's going to be useful. And that kind of leads on to but asking permission to introduce models. I don't ask permission. I just introduce them.
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing whenever I listen to other coaches saying, we have to ask permission to introduce. No, we don't. Let's just introduce it. See what they make of it.
Well, we're bringing something into the conversation that will hopefully generate new thinking that they may not be aware of already. And people don't know what they don't know. And if we can help bridge that gap between where they are and understanding themselves better, I don't see the problem with just introducing it, like you say. So I'm the same. I don't ask permission either. So it's all about helping them to think about the situation better and also to understand themselves better. So one of the things I think about introducing the model is that, and it's the same with cognitive behavioural coaching, generally, that people then have the tools so that in the future they feel more empowered to understand themselves better and deal with future situations.
Yeah, and throughout our training, we're introducing approaches that draw on psychotherapeutic approaches and techniques that are used. So we're stripping out some really good stuff, some tools and techniques that we think are helpful in the coaching room. So I think definitely we're going to be being directive about that, aren't we? Introducing what we think is helpful.
Yeah. And just to see what happens. What do people notice? And how does it impact their thinking and their perspectives? I think the other element about this, we can start with something like the space model to explore the situation, but I think it also integrates into other coaching styles and coaching approaches. So I know that you love Gestalt and
I do.
Gestalt approach to coaching. So I'm thinking that once you've explored the situation as it is, you could then go on to help your clients find new perspectives with something from Gestalt coaching.
You could, yeah. And I think actually Gestalt builds quite nicely on the elements of the space model. So the thinking, the feeling, physiology, behavior, and actually bringing all that into the room is just a Gestalt way of dealing with it. But all those elements are there. So I think you could very easily start with the space model, get all of that stuff. Okay, well, let's bring that into the room and let's see how that feels. Make it live.
Yeah. And then I like to work in quite an embodied way. So it fits well when we're looking for new direction, new ways of being. If we're in a situation, I think it's really hard to change your thinking in that moment. But if we can start to think about our body and shift our body and maybe practice that in the coaching room so that we have a place to go to in the next time that we encounter that situation, then hopefully by shifting our physicality, we can start to think differently about it. It's a bit of a reminder. So I like to combine it, I think, a little bit with embodiment work.
Yeah, that's a very Gestalt way to be.
Yeah, they're all mixed, aren't they?
Actually, on the program material that we have, I talk about the idea of, and this is very much Gestalt therapy, the idea of someone saying they feel tied up, and actually as an experiment, the therapist tying them to the chair to see how they might release themselves from the chair, and that idea of breaking free from it. Don't go tying people to chairs. It's not a good idea.
No, I'm sure no one actually thought of doing that until you mentioned
but
it.
someone did bring it up and say, you wouldn't do that, would you? No, it was just a silly example. Yeah, good. So yes, I think all of these, and what we try to do on our program is interlink all of the different approaches that we have. So cognitive behavioural coaching definitely ties into Gestalt. Ties people up. And no, it doesn't. It ties into Gestalt because it's still, but Gestalt brings it into the room, and you work in a very embodied way. So that embodiment coaching is part of it as well. So it all fits together rather neatly. So yeah,
I think it does, and it all really helps to promote deeper awareness of ourselves, of our thinking.
Funnily, I was talking to someone on the course the other day, and we were doing a little bit of an exercise, a Gestalt exercise, but thinking about their thinking and their emotions and their physiology. And I asked her where she felt the anger she was feeling when she received an email from someone. And she could describe, she said, I felt frustrated and angry. And I said, where did you feel that? And she sort of indicated it was in her sort of throat. I said, okay, well, what was the feeling? How does that feel, that feeling in your throat? And she said, I've got no idea. I haven't got the email in front of me, so I can't conjure it up. I can't tell you that. So that was interesting that she couldn't bring that feeling to mind of how that felt for her. And that's very much part of the Gestalt approach, is to actually bring it into the room, and get them feeling it in the room. But her, she couldn't do it. So it's an interesting. We talk about it in terms of, okay, what was the emotion, what was the physiology, but some people might not be able to remember what the physiology was.
Yeah, and some people might not be connected enough to their body. They might be more of a cognitive person. So there may be some hurdles in exploring some of these areas. And I know you've talked before about when you ask someone, how does that feel? They'll often tell you how they think.
Yeah. That happens a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but what's the emotion? Well...
So it's not straightforward
No.
every time, and it can take a bit of digging down and exploration, but worth it, I think. This is a really great model.
Good.
So I'm going to invite our listeners who are coaches to be curious and perhaps try using the space model in their coaching practices, if that's something they have in their toolbox, and just see what happens.
Yes, be curious in your coaching. It's a great way to be. Lovely. Thank you, Helen. Thank you for bringing the space model into the room for us today and exploring that. I've enjoyed it. Next time on the podcast, we will be exploring the topic of confidence.
We will indeed. I'm looking forward to it already. Thank you for listening. And we would love if you could give our podcast a rating on whichever is your preferred platform, and maybe leave a comment or some feedback for us. That would be fabulous.
And subscribe. Tick the follow button so then it pops up and you'll see the next episode.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
Lovely, wonderful. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.